Today we have Kiki Shiple on the show. I'm really excited. I met this girl when I moved to Arizona. And if you don't follow her on Instagram, you should because her content is amazing. I'm a content person and I look at your content. I'm like, oh, she is so good. But let me tell you a little bit about her and why I wanted her to come on the show. She's a physician assistant from the Philadelphia area, but she specializes in hormone optimization work. Someone like me with Hashimotos, I pay attention to this kind of stuff. So after 6+ years of optimizing both men and women's hormones using bioidentical hormone medications, as well as going through her own health journey, she decided to pivot and start working exclusively with women to help them optimize their hormones in a natural, holistic way. Her approach includes a combination of her experience with Western medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, which I love, teachings from the medical medium, hello, love him, energy work, mindset shifting, and emotional healing. So that's why I wanted to have you on the show. So welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
Okay, it's not often that you meet someone that practices Western medicine that also is like, oh yeah, medical medium and like inner
Right.
child
So
work.
true. Uh-huh.
So tell me, how did you get into all the things? Like, because most Western medicine people are very set in like Western medicine.
Yeah, for sure. So I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. I started having symptoms of it when I was 15, but wasn't officially diagnosed until I was about 24. I had just graduated from physician assistant school. I had moved home. I went to school in Florida, moved back to the Philadelphia area to work with my dad, who's been my supervising physician ever since. And I literally overnight gained like 30 pounds. I couldn't get out of bed. I was so depressed. I had horrible, like debilitating brain fog. And my dad was trained in hormone optimization. So he checked all my labs and everything was out of whack. My thyroid was underactive. He diagnosed me with PCOS. My cortisol was off the charts. My adrenals were a mess. So he put me on, the bioidentical hormone medications that I prescribe for my patients now. And they didn't really do anything for me. They helped a little. I felt okay. I definitely felt better on the medications than off. But like most people, when we put them on our program, it's like a night and day difference. And for me, like it was just night. Like there was never any like glimmer of hope from these medications. And so, go
Sorry,
ahead.
what were they supposed to do?
So like optimizing my thyroid should have like lifted the brain fog and given me a lot of energy, helped me lose the weight that I had put on. We had me on progesterone to help with my periods, metformin for the PCOS to help with insulin resistance, supplements to help bring my cortisol down, and like nothing really, like number wise things would look perfect and I would still just feel like absolute crap.
Yeah.
And so I went on like this for years, and like I would go on the hormones and I'd come off of them, and like I wouldn't really see a huge difference, but then something would happen and I'd get back on for a little bit. And so finally in 2018, I started developing side effects to all of the hormones. I like could no longer tolerate them at all. I was getting really horrible anxiety and palpitations from the thyroid medicine. Progesterone was causing all kinds of problems. Like everything was just not agreeing with my system. Like something was happening. And I didn't really know what, but I just got off of everything. Well, then next thing I knew, I got a flu shot. And then right after that, I started coming down with chronic flares of Epstein-Barr 1 week a month, every month for a year. And I would get strep throat with it. And
Now, did you know it was Epstein-Barr? Did a doctor diagnose you with that, or was that your
I diagnosed myself with it.
correct? Because most
Yeah.
doctors aren't like, oh yeah, this is Epstein.
No. So I went to the ER the first time because I let it get so out of hand. I was flying back from Santa Monica. I woke up on a plane in Philadelphia and I was like, I'm in so much pain. I literally can't walk right now. Like something is really, really wrong. And so I ended up going to the ER. They found absolutely nothing wrong with me. But my mom was with me and she says to me, Kelly, this feels like mono. This feels like when you had mono in high school. And that got me thinking. And so they did do like a mono test in the hospital that came back negative, but what you can do is check the Epstein-Barr antibodies. So we checked those and they were like off the charts. And so since I had already had mono before, like the mono test isn't necessarily accurate, but the antibodies will be if they're over a certain level.
Now, really quick, what are the symptoms for Epstein-Barr?
Great question. It can honestly be, there's a very wide range of symptoms you can have, but what I was presenting with was horrible sore throat with like golf ball lymph node swelling. I had horrible body aches, like to the point where I literally like could barely move. Really bad fatigue usually. However, like when I had mono in high school, I was wired. I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep for weeks. And that's actually, some people present that way with Epstein-Barr. And there's actually even like medical medium talks about Epstein-Barr being linked to more severe conditions that we don't really know a lot about, things like MS. He says that Epstein-Barr actually contributes to symptoms like MS. Anyways, so I started trying to, heal myself. I'm like, I'm a PA. I should know what to do. And each month would come and I'd say, okay, the true test is if I get sick again this month. And each month I kept getting sick and sick and sick. And so it was like I was trying to eat really clean. Like I thought I was doing everything right. And clearly I wasn't, because it just kept happening. And so that's when, about probably 5 or 6 months into this, after trying everything I could think of, I started researching. I was like, there's got to be people out there who are going through the same thing as me. And that's when I came across the medical medium community. So I started reading about his teachings, and honestly, they changed my life. Started implementing different supplements he recommended, avoiding foods that he recommends avoiding, which I had never heard of or thought about before. Like everybody talks about like gluten and dairy, of course, but like he was recommending avoiding things like pork and eggs and like nutritional yeast. I was eating nutritional yeast at least once a day. Like, so there were a lot of things that I wasn't even thinking about.
Do you still not eat eggs? Quick side note.
I don't.
So do you do like what he says to this day, like your protocol?
No, but there are certain things that I've become grossed out by, because I know the effect that they have on my body, and like I have no desire to have them. Now that doesn't mean I don't cheat. Like I'll eat fast food like once a week. I'm still eating out at restaurants when I probably shouldn't be, but I don't get sick like I used to.
Do you avoid eggs, like you check all the ingredients and things too, or is it just more like eating straight eggs?
Now, I never really liked eggs. So someone telling me not to eat eggs was like, okay, no problem. I know a lot of people really like them, but I don't eat straight eggs. If it's in something, I don't make a big deal of it, especially if I'm eating at a restaurant or something, but I definitely avoid straight eggs.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's so much that he recommends. I think it's really hard to stick with all of it, but if you can pick and choose things that like don't really affect your life so much, you're going to be doing something good for your body. So anyways, yeah, I started following the medical medium's teachings, and then that brought me through 2019. I really, knock on wood, don't get sick anymore. And 2020 hit, COVID hit, and I was like, I need to bring this information to people, and I need a way to learn in the most efficient, like best possible way, how to treat the body in a more natural way, because the Western medicine approach is just no longer in alignment with me. It doesn't even work for me at this point. And I know there's a lot of people who feel the same as I do and who want a more natural approach. And I haven't been able to give them that before. So that's when I decided to go into Ayurvedic medicine. I'm in a 2-year Ayurvedic health program, learning all about that, which has been fascinating. And so my approach is kind of a combination of all the above.
So if someone comes to you and they're like, okay, I'm sick, like I clearly have stuff going on. I've had the brain fog, I've had the weight gain, like all the things. What's like a typical protocol that you walk them through? Because clearly like hormones didn't work for you, but it looks like you're still using them for your clients. So
Yeah.
like, what do you walk people through?
So it's become this like very slow transition that I'm trying to get more and more away from Western medicine and into more like Eastern medicine, intuitive healing, things like that. So if somebody comes to me like at my actual practice, they're getting the Western medicine, hormone medication approach, because that's what they're looking for if they're seeking me out there.
Yeah.
If they're coming to me for a more natural approach, then it's a much more intuitive process. So it really depends on the symptoms that they're experiencing. I always like to emphasize that, like, we've been so conditioned that we need numbers to prove that we have a condition.
Totally.
And we don't. Like, you can sit here and tell me that you have, brain fog, fatigue, and weight gain. And I can say, well, your thyroid's probably involved, but there's probably some other things going on too. Most of us are being affected by Epstein-Barr. Most of us are being affected by things like heavy metal toxicity. So I like to kind of look at the body as a whole, not necessarily just focusing on, one specific thing, maybe being the thyroid, and implement supplements and food changes and little tweaks in lifestyle just to help the body function more efficiently. And that usually is, those little changes add up.
If people have autoimmune, do you believe that it's really Epstein-Barr that's going on?
I do.
Yes. So
I
do you
do.
have people who come to you with autoimmune, like start doing an Epstein-Barr protocol?
I do. Absolutely. In my practice, I actually have a really great supplement protocol that I have been using for years. So it's interesting, as part of the way I was trained to do hormone work in, the Western medicine world, like Hashimoto's and autoimmune conditions weren't really addressed. And the doctor that teaches us to do this work, he's like, it's too complicated. Don't go there. The medication's going to help anyways. And I was finding it absolutely was not. I couldn't help these people that had Hashimoto's. Like, the medication wasn't enough to get them feeling better. And I needed bigger doses, and they needed a longer amount of time on those bigger doses to really feel good. And so I started doing my own research, and I came across a Dr. Brownstein who's written a few books on iodine. And his approach is really interesting because iodine is controversial in Hashimoto's. If you take too much of it, it can actually make it worse. But his theory is low doses can actually make it better.
Wow.
So he has this supplement protocol. It's like B vitamins, magnesium, vitamin C, a few other things. And he starts patients on that protocol and then adds in a tiny bit of iodine. And he says you have to prepare the thyroid to have some iodine in your system so that you don't make things worse. And in Hashimoto's, micro, teeny tiny doses of iodine are plenty, and they actually bring antibody levels down over time. So I've been doing that since I started doing this work, and I've seen amazing results. I've got people's antibody levels from the thousands down to practically zero. It's been really incredible.
What are some things that people should just get out of their diet?
That's always like the hardest conversation to have. Well, I would say, especially if you have an autoimmune condition or think you have an autoimmune condition, cutting gluten and dairy out, it's really a good thing to do. Gluten and dairy in general are inflammatory. And so if you have an autoimmune condition, I mean, you have higher levels of inflammation in your body than someone who doesn't. I mean, but we're all battling inflammation and insulin resistance and all of that. So I would say, definitely the gluten and dairy. I really think eggs and pork are like a huge problem. And it's amazing how I'm so aware of it now because I don't eat it. And everybody eats so much pork and so many eggs. And it's like, maybe have them a couple times a month. Like, you don't have to, I don't like saying you have to cut things out completely, because I think it can be really hard, and it can make us, hyper focused on that. And like, it doesn't have to be that way. But like, if you cut back to a couple times a month, I mean, you're only helping your body.
We don't eat pork anyways because Peter grew up vegan and like
Okay.
fasted by pork. I occasionally will sneak bacon when we go.
Sure. Yeah, I get it.
My kids don't eat it at all whatsoever.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on things like IBS and like gut symptoms? Because there's so many women. I find it actually kind of alarming
Mhm.
how many women have symptoms and issues with that. And
Yeah.
they don't necessarily have autoimmune,
Right.
have like terrible gut issues.
It's a great question. So the gut is not something I have really gotten into just because it's like a whole
Thing.
another, yeah, like
Totally.
it's a lot. It's fascinating, but again, it's just not something I've gotten into and actually until Ayurveda, because that is all about the gut and digestion, and it's like learning a whole nother language about it. So anyways, I really think, well, at least from an Ayurvedic perspective, most of us are not eating properly for our bodies. So there's something called your dosha, which is your mind body type. And we're supposed to eat to support whatever imbalance is going on in our body currently. And it's possible to not have an imbalance, but most people do. And there are tests you can take online that tell you what your dosha is. And that's going to tell you what is currently out of balance in your body. You also have your dosha that you were born with. So, you might read through the doshas and say, well, that's like my baseline, but this is what is out of whack right now. So, for example, I struggle with my weight. I'm a kapha dosha. Kapha is like grounded, like round, soft. A lot of times we don't like to be very active. Like we can get stuck in kind of like our lazy sedentary ways, which is what brings on weight gain. We're cold, we're like dense. So we're supposed to actually eat foods that pose that. So warm cooked vegetables. Like, in our society, we're like, oh, you need to lose weight, eat a salad. Well, a salad's actually like the worst thing that you could eat according to Ayurveda because it's cold. And the two doshas that can lead to weight gain, their qualities are cold. So you need to eat warm foods to actually counteract that.
That's amazing. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
like interested. I'm gonna go Google all of this now.
absolutely. Sahara Rose, she is actually the one I learned about the program that I'm in through. And I love her Ayurveda book, but she has a test, like a quiz on her website.
Okay.
And you can take that and figure out like what kind of doshic imbalance you have going on. Well, just to expound a little bit more on what I was just saying. So I really think that we're not aware of what is actually going on like in our bodies, and then we're eating things that only aggravate our digestive systems, and that chronically over time can absolutely lead to conditions like IBS, H pylori, SIBO. There's also such a problem with our food, and I like can get on my soapbox about this for like hours, but our food is exposed to so much crap, and we're exposed to so much crap, and like there's just chemical after chemical in all like so much of our food, to the point where I had a friend who was really really suffering with SIBO for a while, and she went to a really great specialist who ended up helping her heal, but he told her like avoid apples because a lot of times apples can actually have mold in them and exacerbate SIBO. And I'm like, I thought I was doing a good thing by eating an apple. Like, what? Like, so it's almost to the point where we literally, even when we're eating, organic fruits and vegetables, like, do we really know what we're putting in our bodies? Probably not. It's scary. And I really think that that's a big part of why, women are having so many digestive issues, but also why, as a whole, we're all so sick
Yeah.
all the time.
So where should we go to start figuring out like what fruit, vegetables are actually like good for us as opposed to like,
Great
yeah, just mold
question.
apples?
It's a great question. So I had never heard that before. I really stick to medical mediums teachings, and his whole philosophy is really like sticking to fresh fruits and vegetables and making sure they're organic. You should be safe, or at least safer than anything else
Correct.
you could get.
Now,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on like heavy metals and protein powders?
Mm,
Because I have a friend who's realizing that her issues all stem from being way overdosed on heavy metals from protein powders she's been drinking for years. And actually, a lot of her symptoms are similar to mine, which I find interesting because I was drinking like 2 shakes a day for years too, because of the network marketing company that I was in. So now I'm like, what?
I know, I know. So I have not really gotten into, I was big into protein powders years ago. I think I was also in the same network marketing company as you. And I recently have started getting back into them and like doing a lot of research on them. And so I think it's just really important, no matter what you're eating, but especially with protein powders, because they do have the reputation of having a lot of, things that can interfere with our systems in them. I think it's important to just know exactly what you're putting in your body. So, the least amount of ingredients on the label possible. I'm always trying to avoid the whey protein because it's dairy, even though some people say that, like, you should be able to process that. I find my body has a hard time. So I stick with like plant-based protein. So Food Babe is actually who I have done a lot of my research through, just to kind of streamline everything and make it easy for me to understand. I always recommend going to her website. She has so much information on there about all the chemicals and preservatives and metals and all kinds of things that are added to any kind of processed foods. She developed a plant-based protein powder actually. And so like I'll use her stuff. I'll do my own research and try to find ones that seem like they're safe. But I think in regards to heavy metals, what the medical medium says is that if we're not actively doing anything to detox the metals from our system, they're only going to accumulate throughout our lives. And then he actually says we can pass them down to our kids. That blows my mind. And I can see in reading about, I think he was talking about mercury poisoning. He was going through the symptoms and I was like, oh, that's my mom and that's my mom's mom and my mom's siblings. Like I can recognize the signs of that in my mom's side of the family. And it makes sense because they grew up in an area that was near a lot of like gas plants, like around Philadelphia. And like they've been exposed to a lot of stuff. People that grew up in their neighborhoods, have come down with various cancers. So it like that all clicked in my brain and like really impressed upon me like how important it is to actively be detoxing. So he has a great like heavy metal smoothie that is good. And like I won't always do all the things he recommends. I'll throw a few things together that I think taste good and I'm like, well, this is at least helping. You gotta make it easy for yourself.
What does your protocol look like today for yourself? And how do you feel? Like, what's the difference for you now today?
Great question. So I am not, I'm like the worst patient ever. I'm not very compliant, which I feel like most people in medicine are like me, but I have gotten much better. And so right now I'm taking a few like natural herbal tinctures that the medical medium recommends to help boost your immune system and fight against Epstein-Barr. So I take cat's claw, I take licorice root, and I take lemon balm. And then I'm taking an iodine supplement to support my thyroid. I'm taking berberine, which is a really great supplement that actually helps fight against insulin resistance in the body, which honestly, anybody could take this supplement. We all have issues with insulin resistance because we're exposed to, so many chemicals on a daily basis. It affects our body's ability to process sugar and respond to insulin. So berberine is a really great supplement to counteract that. I have a few Ayurvedic herbal supplements that I had an Ayurvedic practitioner recommend for me based on my dosha and what's been going on with my body. But Banyan Botanicals is a really, really great Ayurvedic resource. They have a ton of different herbal supplements on there that are really, really helpful. You can usually break it down by the symptoms you're having to find something that could help you.
Is that a website?
Yes. Yeah. banyanbotanicals.com. And then I again really try, I do my best with my diet. So like eggs I really don't eat, pork I really don't eat, I actually don't eat chicken. I'll eat red meat like once a week just to get some protein in my system, but I'm really, really heavily focused on fruits and vegetables. And I'll do like berries for breakfast, I'll do like some stir fried veggies for lunch and dinner, and that's pretty much it.
So you're pretty much vegetarian.
Kind of. I hate saying that because like I eat beef. So people are always like, oh, but you're not.
Do you do any fish?
I do. I will do fish. Now, again, medical medium talks about being careful with seafood because we get exposed to heavy metals from that. So I try to only do seafood maybe once or twice a week. So between that and the red meat, I'm getting, a decent amount of protein which is fine for me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I love that. So tell us, like, let's pivot a little bit into business before we
Sure.
wrap up because a lot
Sure.
of these women have businesses.
Sure.
What was like your biggest hang up with like building this as a business outside of your like Western practice?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, what are people going to think was my hang up. So, my dad is a very well known physician across the country and even across the world. And he's been in practice for over 30 years. So, he firmly believes in science. And so, that's why he got behind like this specific program that we're trained to optimize hormones through, because it's evidence-based medicine. When we go to these conferences, the doctor gets up there and he presents study after study after study supporting what we're doing. And so I, have been raised by him and then joined him in practice. And, I always firmly believed in the science. And then it was like, well, then the science failed me. And I was like, then what? Where do I turn? Who do I go to? Like, my dad can't help me. And, people who are trained to do the work we do, they can't help me. And like, I'm really on my own. So I fully believed as I did my research and I experimented on myself and I, was figuring out what was working for me. I wholeheartedly believed in it. But then I would report back to my dad and be like, this is what I'm doing. This is who I'm learning from, telling him about, Anthony William, the medical medium. And he's like, that's crazy. And I'm like, I know it sounds crazy, but it's working. Like you can't argue that. So that was kind of my first experience with like what other people could think. And I was like, oh no, what if this doesn't catch on? What if people think I'm nuts? And, it's really different being in the Philadelphia area versus being here in Arizona. Because here in Arizona, everyone's so open to anything and, open to the spiritual side of things. And, it doesn't have to be like black and white textbook science. And so I think that really made me a lot more comfortable with it was my move out here, because people are like, this is awesome, and it's working for you. And people here actually know who the medical medium is and what Ayurvedic medicine is. Whereas in Philly, they're like, what? What are you talking about? So that really like eased my worries.
What do your parents think today?
Um, they support me, but they definitely think I'm a little crazy.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. That's fine.
Yeah, which is fine.
So, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in business and building your own business?
Mm. Biggest lesson I have learned, I would say, is how important consistency is. And I know like everybody talks about that, but I'm a procrastinator. I'm a self-sabotager. I I've done those things for most of my life. And so, I get into little funks and like the self-doubt creeps in and the procrastination happens. And I feel like every time I'm bouncing back quicker and quicker and I'm able to, get the things done that I need to get done. But it's really incredible to see when I am consistent how great the engagement is on my social media and the traction I'm getting with new clients and new calls. And then I really do see the effect when I'm not consistent. And so I just think that like it can't be emphasized enough like how important consistency is.
And I think consistency with intention, like knowing
Yes,
what you're here, like what you want from it, instead of like
absolutely.
showing up to show up.
Absolutely. And I
Mm.
think that also is like really important in your health and taking care of yourself. And like again, I'm the bad non-compliant patient who like doesn't take things consistently, and I see the effects when I don't take my supplements or eat the way that makes me feel good. And versus when I'm doing those things consistently, I feel amazing. So it's just really interesting, like how the two worlds are combining.
So, what type of women do you usually work with to help them with their health? Like, what are their most common problems and symptoms? I know you do PCOS.
Yes. I really work with women of all ages with all conditions, but PCOS is definitely a sweet spot for me because I have it, I've gone through it, I can like, help women get through it. And they usually appreciate my own personal experience. It's nice to have somebody who like actually understands what you're going through. I see a lot of women with underactive thyroids, Hashimotos. I work with women going through menopause as well, which I actually don't talk about very much on my social media, but that's a big bulk of the women that I help. And really, I mean, the chief complaints they present with are usually, they're really tired, they have horrible brain fog, trouble losing weight, trouble gaining weight can actually be a symptom too that doesn't get talked about enough. And trouble with sleep and trouble with irregular periods. I'm actually putting out a resource, should be this week, that is going to break down the top 10 symptoms that women present to me with. And it's going to have a breakdown of how to approach it both hormonally, Ayurvedically, and with the medical mediums teaching. So keep an eye out for that.
All right. So if we follow you on Instagram,
Yes,
we'll be able to find it. Okay.
absolutely.
We'll link your Instagram in the show notes below.
Perfect.
Before we wrap up, I always ask everyone, like, I think you've talked about your rock bottom on the show, or one of them.
One of them.
Probably was like, your health and things not working for you.
Mm-hmm.
What would you, if you could go back in time and like talk to that version of you and like give her advice about this like rock bottom that she's in, about this moment of like, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, what would you say to her?
I would say keep the faith because everything really does happen for a reason. And I have, ever since I came out of that year of hell, I have really seen that this is my journey because I was put on this earth to help people going through the same thing. So I had to go through that in order to pivot, in order to transition my practice and change the way I was treating my patients. So yeah, there is light at the end of the tunnel, even when it doesn't seem like it, and just keep the faith.
Well, it was creating your purpose.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, that's like huge.
I wouldn't be here if I didn't go through that, So yeah.
Ah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your wisdom and your time with us. Can you tell everyone where they can find you, how they can work with you, all the things?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm mainly on Instagram. My handle is Kiki, Kiki Shiple, Shiple. I am on Facebook, Kelly Shiple, and then my website is Kelly Shiple, which is KELLY.com.
Perfect. And we'll put that in the show notes too.
Perfect.
All right, everyone, if you love this episode, don't forget, take a screenshot. You can tag both of us. Tell us what you loved from it, and be sure to stay tuned for her document that she's going to be presenting to help us with all of our issues. And if you have questions, I'm sure she's happy to answer. You can hit her up on Instagram. I will see you guys back on the show soon.